The elevator has a contract with the building, lobby, second floor, third floor, basement, the end. That was the public understanding, the one printed in the directory beside the brass doors, the one guests accepted without thinking, the one the building's owners never found reason to correct. But some buildings employed workers whose routes did not end at the basement. Elevator operators, night engineers, freight handlers, and maintenance men who went below the marked bottom as a routine part of their work. They did not call it unusual. They called it the lower level. They never mentioned it to the guests above. The Grand American Hotel of 1910 presented itself as a complete and finished world. You entered through brass-framed revolving doors into a lobby that rose 2 stories above the marble floor, potted palms, a registration desk of dark mahogany, a mezzanine with wrought-iron railings where guests could look down at the arriving public. The elevator doors were polished. The bellmen wore uniforms. The directory beside the elevator bank listed every floor in brass numerals, from the lobby to the highest guest room, with the basement marked at the bottom as a single entry, storage, mechanical, the end. This was the version of the building that appeared in photographs, in hotel brochures, in the civic memory of every American city that hosted one. The Palmer House in Chicago, the Willard in Washington, the Adolphus in Dallas, the Brown Palace in Denver, marble lobbies, coffered ceilings, elevator banks that moved guests smoothly between identical corridors of numbered doors, grand, self-contained, complete. The building began at the entrance and ended at the basement. Everyone agreed on this because the directory said so, and in the American commercial building of 1910, the directory was the final word. But the building had another version. I was not looking for it. I was tracing the service infrastructure of commercial buildings constructed between 1880 and 1920, specifically the relationship between public floor plans filed with municipal offices and the internal layouts documented in contractor records and maintenance manuals. The original question was structural. Why did the proportions of so many American public buildings from this era fail to match the functions they were built to serve? Why were freight corridors wider than their stated cargo justified? Why did basement excavations in buildings of standard commercial scale consistently reach depths that exceeded any mechanical requirement the building systems would have demanded? The buildings I was looking at kept pointing downward. I had not gone looking for what was below. I found it because the documents kept describing it, and the documents did not stop. What the documents described was this: every major American hotel, department store, federal courthouse and train station built during this period operated on a dual infrastructure model. The public moved through lobbies, corridors, elevators and stairwells designed for visibility and circulation. Workers moved through a parallel system, freight elevators separate from guest elevators, service corridors running behind guest room walls, basement-level utility passages connecting buildings to steam lines and electrical conduits beneath the street, and sub-basement levels that handled waste, coal, and mechanical systems no guest would ever encounter. This was not hidden. It was an engineering standard. The separation of public and service circulation had been a documented design principle in American commercial construction since at least the 1870s. What was less documented was the depth. The basement listed in the public directory was rarely the actual bottom of the building. Below the storage level, below the mechanical room, below the coal bunker, sub-levels existed that served different purposes depending on the building's age and location. In cities built on filled land near rivers or lakefronts, these lower levels sometimes predated the structures above them. In cities that raised their street grades after floods or fires, and more American cities did this than the standard histories record, the lowest floors of older buildings were no longer at street level. They were beneath it. A building constructed in 1875 when the street outside stood at one elevation might by 1910 have its original ground floor several feet below the new grade. What had been the public entrance was now accessible only from within, reclassified in every document filed after the grade change as a sub-basement, as storage, as infrastructure, as nothing. The workers knew this. They were not told to know it. The knowledge accumulated the way any occupational knowledge does, through years of moving through the actual structure floor by floor, door by door, learning which passages connected to which and which landings the elevator reached that did not appear in the lobby directory. They knew the building the owners did not know. They never mentioned it. Here is what the official history of American commercial architecture has no comfortable way to process. The knowledge was not distributed evenly across the workforce. Night engineers understood the mechanical systems in their specific corridor. Janitors knew the service passages they cleaned each shift. Freight handlers knew the loading routes they ran each morning. But the elevator operator was the only worker in the building whose job required movement through all of it, from the highest guest floor to whatever the cable reached at the bottom of the shaft. Not the bottom listed in the directory, the bottom of the shaft. He was not an archivist. He was not an investigator. He was a man in a uniform who worked a lever and watched floor numbers rise and fall through the gap in the door. He had not been hired to notice what the building contained below its official bottom. He noticed it anyway because the cable went there, and the cable was his responsibility, and the door opened when it stopped. What he saw below the basement is where this investigation has to begin. The call came on a Tuesday night in February 1914, logged in the maintenance record of a Chicago hotel as a routine freight transfer. Linens from the fourth floor to the basement laundry, then a return run with cleaning equipment for the morning crew. The operator on duty had worked the building for 6 years. He knew the shaft the way a river pilot knows a channel, by feel, by the sounds the cable made at each landing, by the slight resistance in the lever when a door was not fully sealed on the other side. He ran the freight car down past the lobby, past the mezzanine storage level, past the coal room and the boiler room, to the level marked on the shaft wall as B2. The lowest stop, the end of the cable's authorized travel. The door did not open. He checked the lever. He checked the safety mechanism. He released pressure and reapplied it. The car sat motionless for 30 seconds, then descended. Not a malfunction drop, a controlled movement, as if a lower landing had registered on the system, and the car was completing a stop it had always been built to make. The floor counter mounted above the door, a mechanical dial that displayed a number at every registered landing, displayed nothing. The car stopped. The door opened. What he saw was not a mechanical room. The landing opened onto a brick corridor approximately 8 feet wide with an arched ceiling of the type used in urban construction before poured concrete became standard after 1900. The brick was old, darker than the building above it, laid in a bonding pattern the operator would later describe as different from anything in the rest of the structure. The corridor ran in both directions from the elevator landing. In one direction, the passage ended at a wall where a door had been bricked over, the mortar newer than the brick surrounding it. In the other direction, it extended beyond the reach of the single electric bulb mounted above the landing into darkness. Along the left wall, at intervals of approximately 20 feet, were door frames, not open doors, frames, the structural surrounds of entrances sealed with brick and mortar. Above 2 of them, lettering was still visible in the older mortar beneath the seal, room numbers or business designations of the kind used in commercial corridors of the 1870s and 1880s, their typeface belonging to a different decade than the building that now stood above them. He did not go further. He returned to the car, rode back to B2, finished the linen transfer, and completed his shift. He mentioned it to the night engineer the following morning. The engineer said the sublevel was old service infrastructure, sealed during a renovation sometime before the turn of the century, nothing to concern the operating staff. No report was filed. The maintenance log for that night records the linen transfer and nothing else. The record I found is not the maintenance log. It is a letter from the hotel's facilities manager to the building's owner, dated March 1914, held in the Chicago History Museum's collection of internal commercial correspondence from the period. The letter requests authorization to permanently disable the freight elevator's lower cable mechanism. The stated reason is a single line: prevent unauthorized access to the lower freight corridor. The authorization was granted. The cable was shortened. After that date, no document the building produced acknowledges the lower landing's existence. He was not the only one. The underground freight system beneath Chicago's Loop District covers portions of over 40 city blocks. It was constructed between 1899 and 1911 as a commercial delivery network, and buildings connected to it had access points in their sub-basements, documented in the contractor records filed during construction. Those access points do not appear in the public directories or fire safety plans filed with the city during the same years. Two systems of documentation were produced simultaneously. The lower one was consistently omitted from the public record. Seattle presents the same pattern in a more visible form. After the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, the city rebuilt on top of itself. The original street-level storefronts, sidewalks, and building entrances remained structurally intact beneath the rebuilt grade. For approximately a decade after reconstruction, residents still used the underground sidewalks, while the new street-level system was completed above them. Then the lower level was sealed, the entrances were closed, and the new grade became the official ground floor. What had been street level became, in every document filed after the rebuilding, storage, infrastructure, the bottom of the city. Cincinnati's unfinished subway tunnels, constructed between 1920 and 1927 and abandoned when funding collapsed, run beneath the city's central streets for approximately 7 miles. The survey records filed before construction note without elaboration the presence of earlier brick-lined passages of undetermined origin that the subway contractors incorporated into the new tunnel alignment. The 1922 survey report uses the phrase antecedent construction of undetermined date, institutional language for corridors that did not fit any timeline the surveyors had been given. Fire, flood, rebuilding, renovation. The proximate cause differed by city. The result was the same. A level that people once used was reclassified as infrastructure, removed from the public record and sealed. The same outcome, the same era, the same silence in every document filed afterward. The official explanation for all of it is reasonable. Cities rebuilt after fires needed new grade levels. Steam and electrical infrastructure required subgrade corridors. Freight delivery in dense urban cores demanded underground access to avoid surface congestion. Each of these explanations is accurate. Each of them, taken alone, accounts for a portion of what the contractor records describe. What the official explanation does not account for is the uniformity. The subgrade corridors in Chicago, the buried storefronts in Seattle, the incorporated passages in Cincinnati, these do not share a single cause. They share a single outcome. In each case, a lower level that once functioned as public or commercial space was reclassified as infrastructure, was removed from public directories, was sealed from public access, and was omitted from every administrative record filed afterward. Fire, flood, rebuilding, renovation, the proximate cause differed by city. The result was identical. A floor that people once stood on became, in the official record, a floor that had never been meant for people. The scale of this is not consistent with ordinary infrastructure development. Steam tunnel networks serve mechanical purposes and are sized accordingly. The sealed corridors described in Chicago's sub-basement maintenance records are not sized for pipes. They are sized for people. 8-foot ceilings, door frames at standard height, brick laid in patterns designed for foot traffic, not utility access. The Cincinnati survey teams that noted antecedent construction of undetermined date were not describing conduit runs. They were describing walkable corridors with corners extending beyond the reach of their equipment. Someone built these for people to use. Then the city was rebuilt above them, and what they had been was reclassified, and the reclassification was treated as a permanent and sufficient answer to a question no one had officially asked. Consider the timeline. The 1870s, street-level storefronts and commercial corridors built at one grade across American cities from Chicago to Seattle. October 8, 1871, Fires destroy Chicago and much of the upper Midwest in a single night. The 1880s and 1890s. American cities rebuild at new grades. The old level is sealed, the new level is documented. The 1890 census captures 62.9 million Americans in unprecedented detail and is stored without backup for the first time in a century of census taking. The 1899 to 1911 Chicago Freight Tunnel network incorporates earlier subgrade passages that are noted in contractor records and not explained. The 1914 maintenance letter requests that a hotel elevator's lower cable be permanently disabled to prevent access. The 1921 fire damages the building where the 1890 census is held. The 1933 order destroys what the fire left. By 1940, the workers who knew the lower levels have retired or died. The buildings remain. The record does not. The ground floor was a decision. Someone decided where the city would begin, and everything below that line was reclassified in the administrative language of the rebuilt city as infrastructure, as storage, as the bottom of what existed. The word infrastructure carries a specific weight. It means the question has been answered. The answer is utility. Do not look further. Modern Americans were taught to imagine cities rising upward, skyscrapers, towers, glass and steel ascending above the street, progress measured in floors added above grade, in skylines that grew taller each decade. The physical record of American cities built before 1890 moves in the opposite direction. It descends. It seals. It reclassifies. The story the rebuilt city told about itself was a story of ascent, and everything that did not fit that story was put below the basement and given a functional name and left there. There was a man, there had to have been, in every major American city between 1890 and 1940 who crossed that line every working night. He wore a uniform, or work clothes, or a maintenance coverall. He had worked the same building for years. He knew which passages connected and which landings the elevator reached that the directory did not acknowledge. He did not call what he saw a discovery. He did not file reports about sealed doorframes or bricked-over corridors or old signage in the mortar of walls the official plans showed as solid foundation. He called it the lower freight. He called it the old level. He assumed, reasonably, given that no one had ever suggested otherwise, that everyone above him already knew, and that the knowledge did not require discussion. He was right that no one asked. He was wrong that no one needed to know. He was the last ordinary worker whose job took him below the bottom of the official record. Not a historian, not an investigator. A man with a lever, a cable, and a floor counter that displayed nothing at the lowest stop. The buildings he worked in are still standing. Some of the shafts are still intact. The floor counter is still mounted above the door, and the landing below the listed basement, sealed and reclassified and removed from every directory filed in the century since, is still there at the bottom of the cable. The city decided the basement was the end. The floor counter, on the nights when the car went past it, knew otherwise.